First of all, thank you all for being here tonight. This is a great opportunity to be able to further share a project that has been more or less an obsession of mine for going on 5 years now. You really don't understand due diligence until you find an idea and you stick with it, and no matter what, you believe it's going to happen eventually one day. For a little background here, I was born and raised about 3 miles east of here in Boyle Heights. Attended the LA Unified School Districts of Hollenbeck Junior High School, Roosevelt High School, and on to East Los Angeles City College, and earned my degree at the University of Southern California in the School of International Relations. However, I ended up in logistics. I've been involved in commercial logistics for 20 years. 7 of those years was working at the largest container terminal at the port of Long Beach, which would be the Hanjin DTI facility. Pushes about 1.2 million container lifts per year. Kind of hard to get an idea about that unless you're in the business. But to give you an idea, a container unit, or a TEU, is cutting a 40-foot container in half. And that's how the business tends to count the amount of volume that runs through the Port of Los Angeles. Our peak was about 17.5 million TEU between the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which when those 2 ports are combined, they're the 15th and 16th largest in the world, but combined they make for the 5th largest container terminal in the world. Yes?
I remember taking some notes on a harbor tour of LA Harbor, and the guy who gave the lecture, the captain or whoever, he said that if you factor in the fact that the ports of Hong Kong and Shenzhen have barges coming downriver, and every offload onto a barge and reload onto a large ship is considered 2 loads, they're not as heavy in their container volume as they seem to be. In comparison with LA and Long Beach combined, which has no river traffic.
That's correct.
So it's not, maybe not even 5th, maybe it's 3rd or 2nd perhaps.
It could be, it could very well be. One of the things is that we are the receiving end of multiple ports coming out of Asia. It just came out yesterday in, if you listen to CNN or Bloomberg, you'll hear that the country of India announced yesterday that they were going to build 7 ports, not 7 container terminals, 7 ports. That is going to probably employ over 1 million people easily, maybe 2 million people. But the ability for India to create those ports is fundamentally different than our ability to create 7 ports. Realistically, it is impossible for this United States to build that for the virtue of well-placed, sometimes, environmental law that protects the environment. And they impact communities. Usually, those less represented communities is where the container flow usually goes through. And there are a lot of social justice issues. There's a lot of issues involved in this, in what we're about to talk about tonight. But I'll get right down to it. We'll go ahead and use this, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the SuperDock. And the SuperDock was the first image of the container terminal. And it's unlike any other container terminal ever conceived in that its configuration is a pier, rather than being a container terminal made up of landfill and asphalt. And by creating the pier, the linear distance, the advantages you take to the linear distance of the pier allows you to put many more ships, but at the same time, the linear configuration assists in the ability to load and unload very long trains.
Is this part of Pier 400 that exists now? Or is it?
Our idea, one of our conceptual ideas, is to put it between the Maersk and the Hanjin facility, which is right on the delineation borderline of the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles.
We're going to have a question and answer session after the presentation, so it's sort of hard when you're working through the presentation to have thoughts interrupted. But
if you have a thought, keep your thought in mind, or even jot it down if you get a chance.
Now, I do need to explain here, this is kind of an unusual type of situation. Is we actually had an original PowerPoint, and what's really kind of fun about this project is the original PowerPoint is part of the packet, which we printed up last Thursday. Then all of a sudden, Gerard had been working on designing a PowerPoint. He came up with, you can see what was before and you can see what's after. And one of the brilliancies, Gerard is a gifted architect, and he's come up with an idea and has simplified it in such a way so you can see this from the old way we were doing it versus the the newer way. But anyway, so as we follow through the presentation here, we will get back to your questions and not a problem. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, one of the biggest issues that we're running into here is, first and foremost, the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach has grown in container intermodalism for over 50 years now. And the configuration has not changed, and as a result of that, what we have is an overgrown port. And one of the biggest impacts we have as a result of that is the impact it has on the surrounding communities, and the impact it has primarily in the Inland Empire in certain areas, as well as the City of Commerce, where there's a very, very large intermodal container transfer facility housed both by the BNSF and Union Pacific Railroads. And they've impacted these communities because of the diesel trucks, which make millions of journeys every year up and down the 710 freeway. As a result of that growth, many of you may know that Metro is attempting right now to build a freeway widening project for many billions of dollars in order to facilitate primarily the truck traffic coming in and out of these ports. Up to 90,000 per day. Now, one of the things here is that one of the railroads wants to fix the problem by putting this intermodal container transfer facility closer to the port in the city of Wilmington, bordering the city of Long Beach. As well as both railroads want to do this, and they want to call them modernization environmental terminals. The reality is that they are not. The reality is that the cost of trucking, as opposed to creating the rail trains at the terminals, becomes advantageous for them to drag many millions of trucks to those close because it's cheap. Most of the truckers are independent contract truckers, and they work for a fee. And they'll probably work for about $25 a load if it's only $5, if it's only 5 miles away. So this is the state of the trucking industry as we know it. One of the senior attorneys of the NRDC, David Pettit, had quoted against the idea of putting this ICTF in saying, the issue we have with this facility and similar proposals is that they don't address the movement of goods from the docks to the rail yards. We wouldn't be opposed if there was some zero-emission system that moved containers to the rail yard, but nobody from the railroad is talking about that or even getting near that. And it's true, the railroads want nothing to do with that idea because it changes the entire configuration. And the railroads are afraid of change. And it's not because they're bad businessmen. It's because they understand changing a system is very difficult when you have a 50-year-old system. And when you want to put a new system inside that 50-year-old system, it's like putting a different blood type into a different body. And people who try to push new technology on the railroads simply don't understand the operations. And that's the fundamental problem. So getting to this page right here, where are we at? We're basically talking about what's happened in the last 50 years of the industry. The result has been, over these years, is to create thousands of more container terminal acreage to go ahead and create these parking lots. You have millions of increased trucker trips per year. You have longer trains, you have bigger cranes and bigger ships. Everything simply got bigger. That was the answer. There was no change in the system. There was no change in the process. And that's the fundamental problem that we have with the technology today. To make that change, you literally have to create a new bridge next to an old bridge, and then turn that new bridge on and allow that old bridge to slowly reduce its traffic. And that's the way the railroads look at that approach, and they say, as long as you are benign to us, as long as you don't affect our operations, build away. As a matter of fact, come up with your own right-of-way. So we're talking about port modernization here. And again, this is just a picture of a regular container terminal. They used to be 70 acres long 30 years ago, 70 acres in size 30 years ago. Today, they are at about 450 acres is your mega terminal today. That is an incredible amount of terraforming. That means you have to build islands. What's that? There are 12 terminals at the Port of Long Beach in Los Angeles. They want to build 2 more. And they want to build 2 more rail yard facilities. We'll be getting to that soon. Our approach is fundamentally different than everybody else's approach because it's operational. What we're saying is that the problem has nothing to do with the speed of trains. The problem has to do with how fast you can load and unload a ship, how fast you can unload and load a train, and how minimal you use trucking. If you minimize the use of trucking right now, which is the #1 component of the intermodal chain right now, and I call it the one man, one can problem, where you get a one man and you marry him to that container for hours, and he has to to dray it to the Inland Empire and dray back an empty container, going back on the 10, 605, 91, 710 freeway. And that is the fundamental problem we have here. I think people have already heard that 3 out of $4 spent by Caltrans is to maintain roads, not to build new roads. And having said that, the fundamental or the major culprit in that damage to those freeways, diesel trucks carrying very heavy containers. An explanation of the SuperDock and how it works. As you can see, it's very, very crane intensive. And the idea is cranes are like hands. And what this is that this is a millipede with hands. It's a card shuffler. If any of you ever sat at a poker table and you saw the dealer no longer shuffling their cards, they stick it in a little machine, it comes back shuffled, and they use 2 decks. What it did was increase the amount of hands. They charged for every one of those hands. Casinos made millions of dollars. This is exactly the same system. What you want to do is you want to use automation to sort the containers, sort them for the trains, sort them for the ships, and have them running all on electrified crane technology. And what does that mean? That means you eliminate the diesel-powered machinery that currently runs at the port, choking up just about everybody. Now there's 2 types of rail technology you can see here. One's on a red stripe and one's on a blue stripe. One is for the conventional intermodal process, which means we're loading conventional trains, double-stacked trains. But the mill system, what we have here is we have a new configuration of a train that runs like a DNA. When it runs underneath or into the system, it matches the size of the dwell car to the size of the container bay. So if it's a 20-foot bay, the car lines up. And so it's like a DNA match, and when it matches, every single crane up and down here, 150 cranes, can descend on the same train and literally load that train in minutes, rather than the 36-hour turn time that currently exists between the BNSF and the UP. Incidentally, we estimate that the turn time for conventional trains going to the Alameda Corridor will go from 36 to 42 hours down to approximately 3 to 4 hours turn time. What that does is that increases the rolling stock, or creates efficiencies for how many trains the BNSF and the Union Pacific use. But more importantly, what it does is it increases the travel speed to Chicago, the travel speed to Memphis, and the travel speed to Dallas. One problem about high-speed rail for freight, I don't care if the train goes 500 miles per hour. It's not going to increase the turn time because it gets bottlenecked at the port and gets halted for 36 hours. That's the only place you can increase the speed of the time of that train. And so the speed of the train inside the urban region isn't really the issue. It's the speed of the transshipment. This is a little, we actually have in our watching it work, and you'll see it one day. We'll go ahead and show it to you, but we don't have a PowerPoint presentation. But it's an animation looking at it. And as you see, it's just like a processor. And when you think about a processor, that's simply what it does. It processes containers. It has a mind of its own, and it basically does a lot of work on energy, on basically electrified energy. Now this gives you an idea, this page right here, the next page, gives you an idea of what it is compared to the Maersk terminal. Now some of you may know that the Maersk terminal, or Pier 400 at the Port of Los Angeles, is the largest pier in the Western Hemisphere, at 485, almost 500 acres of land. The problem with Maersk is that they only have 15 cranes, which means they can only berth 3 large post-Panamax ships. Post-Panamax ships mean ships that are approximately 1,000 feet in length, and they are very wide. They're so wide that they can't go through the Panama Canal until now. The Panama Canal is now widening their berths to become more competitive with the ports of Los Angeles and the ports of Long Beach for that business. But if you can see here, this terminal is 1/4 the size of Maersk. However, it can load 2.5 times more ships, and it has a 20% more crane-to-ship ratio when loading and unloading ships. What that does is that this actually, acre per acre, has a 15 times performance and storage than Maersk, because the containers are stored vertically. And when Bart was talking about Kaiser, Henry Kaiser invented the first vertical terminal in 1968. I was a toddler at that time, and thinking about it now, he had the vision, and I would dare say Henry Kaiser failed at creating the container terminals, but I would hardly call Henry Kaiser a failure. He created Kaiser Permanente, Kaiser Steel, Kaiser Cars. The man was an industrialist. He was a visionary. And for him to have this vision 40 years after when I came up with this idea is nothing compared to the vision that man had 40 years ago when he could see that far into the future. But today, now is his time. If there's ever been a time, this is the time to do it. Giving you an example of the logistics, a lot of you aren't familiar with the logistics, this is how a container moves from the Port of Los Angeles to Long Beach. And it's intentionally very busy because it is very busy. What you have is 12 terminals all doing the identical system. They're moving trains and trucks into the Alameda corridor and into the 710 freeway. Those are your two right-of ways to get containers today, at least at this point. And the problem with that is they create choke points. I like to call the Port of Long Beach and LA a hydra. It's a 12-headed monster. Unfortunately, it only has one throat to eat. And well, actually it has two throats to eat. But the problem with the throats is the throats go both ways. So not only does it eat, but it also, so that's the problem. And those choke points create tremendous, that is the traffic you see every day. 50 years of a logistics change, only overgrowing. And the ports of LA still want to grow more. And they want to build more terminals, they want to build more rail facilities. And I will challenge any logistics expert. The more rail facilities you grow, the less efficient that choke point at the Alameda corridor becomes, because you're creating more traffic in that small area. This gives you an example right here of the trail that's made in this logistic. If you follow me, we go from the ship. Ship pulls up to the berth, crane picks it up, puts it on a truck. Truck goes into the container yard. Container yard parks the container. Then another truck. Mind you, a machine has to put that container off the truck and put it onto the yard, either on the deck, what we call it, on the ground, or stack it in stacks. Now, keep in mind, another trucker is going to come to pick that container up. He's going to take it to one of two places. He's going to take it to the train yard, which we call the on-dock terminal, or he's going to put it on a truck that will go up the 710 freeway to the Commerce area, City of Commerce, and be loaded onto a train there. Keep in mind, the Alameda corridor, and this is their dirty little secret, over 1 million truck trips. We don't know how many because we can't tell, because their papers won't tell us how many containers are being paid for using the 710 freeway. But get this, the Alameda corridor charges for containers that take the 710 freeway to the City of Commerce, but they still get charged for using the corridor. The problem is that it's so inefficient that there's an overspillage of trucks that are rail designated, but they didn't want to lose that money. So they forced the shipping companies to charge those trucks the $40 to go through for a 40-foot container as if it went through the Alameda corridor in the first place. Nobody wants to talk about the inefficiency of the Alameda corridor. Well, let me take that back. Everybody wants to talk about the inefficiency of the Alameda corridor, that it's 1/3 capacity. The problem has nothing to do with the capacity. It has everything to do with how many trains can go in and out of that corridor. You could put 150 trains in that corridor if they didn't have a choke point, if they were coming from one source to the next, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this is the dirty little secret that the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach don't want the public to know. So we could keep going. We're still here. Take it to the container yard, or take it to the ICTF and the City of Commerce. Either way, it's going to end up on the 710 freeway if it's going by truck. Then, a full unit train is built, goes through to the city of origin, be it Chicago, Dallas, Memphis. The bottom system is the new system. And you create this zero emissions container supply chain by simply having the ship come to the dock, be sorted on the SuperDock, have a full unit train, shoot into the Alameda corridor, and go to its city. That means you don't need an intermodal container transfer facility. And you also don't need 12 on-dock terminals picking up trucks and going into the 710 freeway. It's all electrified. This is the new container supply chain. Looks a little cleaner. Why? Because there will be massive consolidation of the container terminals. You don't need 5,000 acres of land to store these containers. You simply need the ability to protract those containers in high volume out of the port as soon as they come off the ships. That's the key. Get them to the Inland Empire. Get them to the City of Industry. Get them to the city of downtown Los Angeles. Get them to commerce. But don't use the freeway. This shows you every single on-dock terminal on the next page. This is what we deal with on a daily basis. Moving trains at the Port of Los Angeles is like watching paint dry. I did it 50 hours a week. I know firsthand. I work with labor doing it. If one man goes down in a critical spot, the entire gang is shot. Because I may not be able to replace that man. I may have to get him out of the hall, bring him over, because somebody may complain that I didn't give him the job that he came with. And that stops the system. There's also lunches. There's also no movement of trains while men are on the dock. There are all these rules for safety, which I'm all in favor of. But the reality is that these rules are 50 years old, and so is the operation. We have to change that. So you can see now there's a new right-of-way we're talking about here that we've created. And what it's called a zero emissions platform. And it's very simple. It's electrified rail. And the electrified rail, we're not sure what our proposal is going to be. It might be third rail electrification. It might be maglev. It might be a combination of maglev and third rail electrification. The technology is there. Roller coaster technology, what they call linear inductive motors or linear synchronic motors, is the technology that's been used over and over again. You use it at Disneyland, you use it at Knott's Berry Farm, you use it on the Metro, you use it on the Metro line. So, what's our objective here? We're consolidating, but more importantly, we're going to take 6 million truck trips off the road, or somewhere between 60 to 70% of every truck taken currently going on the 710 freeway. What does that mean? That means we don't have to widen the 710 freeway. We only need to create an area where we can put 6 million containers on. They don't necessarily need to be on one chassis, on one rig, with one trucker clogging up that freeway. And for electrified trucking, if you're a proponent of electrified trucking, I got news for you. You still got to create a new freeway for electrified trucking because the floor is electrified. But that means they got to build a freeway, conventional, and an electrified freeway next to it. There's no getting around that. The reality is that the truck is the problem at this part of the container supply chain. So, what's our answer? The SuperDock has a friend. It's called the Electric Container Transfer Facility. And what it is some of us call it the mini-me, because it's basically, it is a mini-me. It's a mini version of the SuperDock. And it has the same configuration so that when the unit cars or the drone trains enter the facility, they are unloaded the exact same way they're loaded at the dock. Simultaneously, all the containers are lifted. Once if we put this in the Inland Empire, or we put it in the City of Industry, or we put it in downtown Los Angeles, we got to get a right-of-way that can snake its way there. What we need is a freight pipeline. That's what we need. We need a freight pipeline. There was a study done in Metrans in 2008. The study in Metrans was talking about the plausibility of what they called the inland docks. By creating inland port terminals, they would protract high volumes of containers through conventional rail. The problem is the BNSF and the UP they're not in the shuttle train business. They're in the LA to Chicago, LA to Dallas business. So they don't want their right-of-ways clogging up with these unit trains. So we have to come up with our own right-of-way. But if we did, I want you to look at this particular Mira Loma, which is the borderline city to the city of Ontario. The distance traveled by a truck is going to be reduced by 85%. Why? Because we eliminated the freeway component of his delivery. The container now has emerged in the heart of that district, industrial zone, where all those deliveries are. He might cross the street to deliver a container and take him 2 minutes. Or he might travel 10 miles away. The study tells us his average travel distance will be 8 miles. Now keep in mind, if it's 8 miles, guess what kind of truck can dray that if it's only going on streets? An electrified truck. Now you're using the right utility, because an electrified truck would never make it from the city of Ontario to the ports and back. It would lose, that's his juice for the day. But if you had them there, it would do these little little deliveries. Average 3-hour turn time for these trucks. Average 3-hour turn time. Some of them turn into 6 to 8 even for one turnaround. Don't ask me, ask a trucker, and he'll tell you. He gets stuck at the port, he could be there all day on only doing 2 loads. Right. So what we're talking about here, without getting too much into it, there is the guideway opportunities, but we definitely want to talk about how the potential guideways are. There is by using basically a water transmission project of sorts, you're able to potentially build these pipelines through rights of way that Edison has, that the rivers have, but we can be creative about that. This is long-term thinking, but it's there. Now, getting beyond the grid, by creating these new rights of way, once we have freight, which pays, keep in mind, if you have a Metro Pass for $5, you can travel 100 miles on that Metro Pass. A container from the ship to the city of Ontario, one container, 40 foot, is $500 one way. $500 one way if you count the cost of all those moves I was talking about. Plus there's a $100 rate for if they come during business hours. It's called Pier Pass. They charge a $100 tax if you get on their freeways. But think about that. Once we have these rights of way, once we dig these rights of way, when we fix it, we got to fix it after we dig. There's potential there for everything. Once you start to get, if you look at this next page here, it starts to expand to the possibilities. Now, we're not here to talk about these possibilities, but rights of way are critical. We can redefine our rivers. We can redefine where, the next page here, where electrified towers go right now in Europe and in Asia. Most of your high power lines are all being built underground through pipelines. Today, here in the United States, we don't do that yet, but one day I think we are. If you go ahead and open up these rights of way, what will happen is you will get land yield of epic proportion. That land yield can create ideas for land developers and people who want to build new ways of green living. And if you use that rail corridor, the sky's the limit. You can use light rail once you capture those rights of way. And then, of course, the possibilities become endless. You start to build what's called TODs. TODs are transit-oriented developments. And by doing that, you create villages next to light rail. And if you have the freight running underground, you can either see it, hear it, or smell it, or wait for it in a traffic intersection. But that freight is paying the way. To give you an idea, the last page here for the Grid Legacy Project is if we follow these rights of way and we follow this business plan, we could use the LA River networks, we could use the Edison rights of way, and we could use the San Gabriel River network. Think about that for 1 second. The San Gabriel River from Azusa, or from the foothills of the San Gabriels, all the way down to Seal Beach, mimicking the 605 freeway. Think about that for a second, but more importantly, it intersects with every Metro link, every Metro rail, every Amtrak link, and intersects with all of them. If I were a businessman, that private concession of rail, if I were able to get the land with it so I can develop the land, is worth it whether I made money on the fares or not. So a private company like they do in Japan, you have public rail and you have private rail companies in Japan. This is a golden opportunity for businessmen who can, with vision, to look at this opportunity and say, I want that light rail. Not because I want to move passengers, because of the developments that I can put all along those rivers. And if they have to be green, if they have to be platinum LEED, I don't care. The land value of that, give me 10% of that land and I will naturally beautify 90% more. But just give me 10% of that footprint to 10% of that 10,000 acres to develop, and we'll pay for it. And then you have a true river project. A river beautification almost literally in biblical proportions, in telling you how life grows from the river. And this is our basic idea in a nutshell. It started with freight, but as it grew into a project where you start to say, let me do some good here. I've got zero emissions so far. How about let's try to move some people the way people want to be moved. How about let's have people live the way they want to live. And as I did my research over years and years and years, it concluded to me that it's all here. Los Angeles, primarily the East Basin, is perfect for this particular project. Is it going to cost tens of billions of dollars? You betcha. You got a 60-mile construction zone with high construction going on at the port. 8 years maybe of construction and development and manufacturing. But what if all those cranes were built here? What if all those train units were built here? What if that entire pipeline, water pipeline, was built here by us, with American companies that built these pipelines? What you would have is you would have a project of what we call national significance. It would be the Hoover Dam. But more importantly, or more exciting, ladies and gentlemen, is that the system can be duplicated at other ports. I started this presentation talking about India building 7 ports, not 7 container terminals, 7 ports. We have the opportunity here to modernize 7 terminals on 3 coasts, and we'll do it driven on environmental necessity, on the environmental imperative that we are going to shrink container terminals like we shrink cancer. We are going to shrink the biggest supply chain logistic that impacts our communities, which is trucking. We have to get a handle on trucking, and we have to electrify it. And when we electrify it, okay, you know, if we had bank tellers today without ATMs, there'd be a lot of bank tellers. And if we had accountants and we didn't have Excel spreadsheets, probably the entire population of the world would need to do all the calculations we do today in terms of accountants handling manually what we do on computers. What we are doing is we are processing. We are creating a new way of doing things. There's never been a more perfect storm of opportunity we have here. So I want to thank you for listening, because it'll give you maybe the chance to talk to somebody else. And what happens like this in one of these, there's a flashpoint. Somebody talks to somebody, and then somebody talks to somebody, and somebody knows somebody. And we're getting there right now. We're getting a lot of traction. I've had great supporters. I spent the first 3 years talking to myself in my room, pacing back and forth, just me by myself. But one person believed in what I was doing, then 2 people believed in what I was doing, then 10 people believed in what we are doing. And that's where I give this up. This is no longer my project. This is our project. So I want to thank you so much for coming out here, taking time on your personal time to come out here and listen to our idea. Thank you very much.
Now, we have time for questions. We have probably one of the most important people in the room to ask a question. Tom Rubin is our basic economist. If there's something that's wrong with this proposal, Tom will look at that and it will challenge it. And this is what's going to be the biggest challenge to me is, where are the holes, Tom? What are your questions here? We have the answers most probably, but this is actually a capitalistic project that's designed to work. It probably has some pieces that need to be fixed, but we're probably going to get to go on this one. It's not like an urban rail system where there's always some issues. So go for your question.
Where is the men's room?
Right there.
Thank you. On a slightly different tack, this being Southern California, these being the ports. I'm going to give you a hypothetical.
Certainly.
Someday in the future, the port of Los Angeles and or Long Beach, and good luck with those two, but I'm not going to go there now, say, yep, this is it. This is the future. We're going to do it. 5 minutes later, the labor unions have a press conference and they announce that the ports will reopen as soon as that decision is reversed forever.
Understood. Very good. One of the things that we are doing right now is speaking to the highest levels of ILWU. One of the issues, first of all, is that ILWU has to be a partner in here. And we have to show them that they're not going to lose jobs, they are going to gain jobs. In 1950s, when the invention of containerization happened on the East Coast, there were violent protests by the longshoremen saying that it was the end of the longshoreman industry forever. that this technology come. None of them wanted to work those container ships. None of them wanted to work those containers. Today, it is the mother of all industries. It is a $1 trillion global business. And there are more longshoremen who have the highest blue-collar pay than anywhere. What we are going to tell them is that this is a repeat of what happened then. Who's going to have to man those receiving facilities in the Inland Empire? Labor's going to say, that's our facility. Who's going to have to man those electric trucks, driving all those little deliveries up there in the Inland Empire? Hey, that's ours, isn't it? So what happens now is we tell them, you have 8 years, you have 2 contract cycles to get ready for this. If you're in your mid-50s, guess what? This thing isn't going to probably affect you one iota. You will not lose, you'll be retired by the time this system's built. But if you're younger, you better get ready, because we're going to spend millions of dollars on training you, because we need mechanics for the thousands of cranes we're building. We need mechanics to maintain that pipeline. We need mechanics to maintain the receiving docks on the other side. We need drivers over there, not just piddling around in the port, but driving out there in the streets. I don't care if they're Teamsters, I don't care if they're ILWU, but there will be labor jobs for this. By the way, the several 100,000 jobs we need to create for the next 8 years, labor, prevailing wage, every single one of them. Steel workers, concrete workers, manufacturers who are going to build those cranes. I don't want a single one of those cranes built in Seoul, built in Shanghai. I want them built here. And I wouldn't want this project if it was going to happen that way. So shame on the people who built the Oakland Bay Bridge by piece in Asia and brought it over here because it was cheap. Shame on them. We won't do that with this project. This project is going to be an American project. It's time we got back the supply chain of those container terminals, instead of them being owned by offshore terminal operators run by the steamship lines. Keep in mind, the steamship lines too are going to look at this and say, wait a minute, I spend $400 million a year on operations and rent on those terminals. You're telling me you can double my throughput and you can lower my cost by 25%? Take my terminal, please. That's what's going to happen. And the railroads will come right in, interface with the rail facilities, and union labor will be sitting on the board of directors in this company. Mark my words, because I said it right here. So I got a lot of witnesses who are going to tell me that, but that's my plan. So that's how we feel about labor. We want them to be a partner in the project, and we believe that we can get them to goal by understanding a lesson in history. That to fear change is the biggest problem we have in moving change forward.
Tom, do you have a follow-up to the answer to that one?
Where did you say the next room was? No.
Okay.
All right, I hope we got an answer. Hal Cooper.
Sir?
You hit a new nerve with Hal Cooper, so he's got a question.
You mentioned about the electric system. How many megawatts is it going to have, and what effect will it have on the utility system?
Okay, he's asking about the megawattage of the terminal facility and what kind of impact it would have. We had the actual pleasure of meeting Mr. Ted Craver Jr., who's the CEO and chairman of the Edison International. I'm running out of brain cells right now. One of the ideas is electrification is very interesting to Edison, obviously, for this type of project. But more importantly, once you build an electrified platform, number one, the answer to your question is, it's very difficult to gauge right now. We would need Parsons and Edison to get together, spending probably several $1 million on a study, along with the preliminary engineering, to know what kind of wattage and what kind of power we're going to need to run the system. But make no mistake, it's going to be significant. However, a fully electrified rail platform lends itself to zero emissions power. The fundamental difference between the container supply chain we have now is it's primarily diesel. You cannot plug in the diesel engine. However, this system is a zero emissions platform in that it's ready. If you can supply it with wind, supply it with wind. If you can supply it with tide, supply it with tide. If you can supply it with sun, supply it with sun. The reality is, it probably needs more power than that. But the beautiful thing about it is, as the future technology moves forward, that platform is ready for that electrification. So to answer your question, we don't know how much wattage. It's going to be significant. It will probably be roughly the size of a small city.
I'd like to point out also that there are inherent efficiencies in steel wheel on steel rail, even if we don't use maglev, over rubber on road. So your total energy use, you have to look at your total, say, BTUs or ERGs or whatever, whether it comes from coal, whether it comes from solar, whether it comes from nuclear, whether it comes from oil, will be lowered by this, because besides the efficiency of the wheel system, you have the weight of one motor for one truck. You have the weight of the fuel for one truck. You have a lot of extra superstructure in the truck. As you probably already know, a railroad train using current diesel technology uses about 1/4 the fuel per ton mile of the equivalent number of trucks. This will be multiplied because you'll be using stationary generation sources, which operate at greater efficiency than variable generation sources.
You have mentioned Parsons. Which Parsons are you talking about?
Parsons Brinkerhoff. We've actually presented to both Parsons Brinkerhoff and Parsons on the project. And the idea right now, one of the things, and we've also incidentally had a meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers, you know, everybody told us that's where your roadblock's going to hit. On the contrary, they got a permit for everything and they're looking for work. There's an EIR in this that everybody tells me to be afraid of. I'm not afraid of this environmental impact report because it will be the first environmental impact report in history that considers the existing infrastructure intermodal system and the removal of those trucks, the removal of those diesel emissions in favor of the project. There's never been an EIR in history that ever took those issues into consideration, because if we're going to build this terminal, the Port of LA and Long Beach have to agree to go ahead and shut down those on-docks and build this terminal. But we believe that the private sector is going to be the easiest sell. The hard sell is the Sierra Club. The hard sell is the NRDC. The hard sell is Communities for a Safe Environment, or East Yards for East Yards for Environmental Justice. But we've shown this to them. We started at the grassroots.
Does LADWP have a role in this?
LADWP would obviously have a role in this once the system really began to elevate, because you're talking about certain rights of way, specifically river rights of way. Jerry Pass.
Yeah. Speaking of DWP and so forth, this facility will be right sitting on the city limits, half of which should be in LA. And they will have a big say-so. That's their territory. The other side is Edison's territory, okay? The other half of it. In that sense, what would a lot of these docks that exist now, what would happen to the land?
Consolidation. What's going to happen is you have 5,000 acres basically, which is a parking lot for containers. If you guys look really closely at a container terminal from the air, you'll see 40% of it is road. It's empty paving road for access of trucks and access of rubber-tired container-moving equipment. 40% of that is flat pavement. It makes for the most expensive parking lot on earth when you think about the rental value on an acreage footage. If we grab that and we consolidate it, what happens? We can use new. Actually, that's very good. That's in Asia, though. It's a whole kind of. But you see, there's a grid of road access.
So would there be some joint powers authority between the two cities?
Sir. Exactly.
Two ports?
They would
have
actually
to do that. That's a hard sell in itself.
It might be, but the reality is that once you create the third right-of-way pipeline, and if it was a private consortium that owned that pipeline for 50 years. There are billionaires would line up to own that concession for 50 years. Warren Buffett, by the way, 50% of the trains that go through the Alameda corridor belong to Mr. Buffett. We are barking up the right tree when we're talking about a good business model. There is no doubt about that.
Yes, I've noticed on this schematic here that this obviously takes up a lot of space, as has been mentioned earlier, and that this one here, it takes up less space. But suppose you build other super docks, like to increase the total capacity of the whole area.
I'm very glad you asked that question, and I'll tell you why I'm glad you asked that question. Because it's going to be up to the communities to either stop or allow that dock to be built, because they know the power that it has in its ability for throughput. which is substantial. But in 2035, they estimate that 40 million container TEUs would be the market here if we could handle it. 40 million TEUs, that's a lot of money.
Well, wouldn't that create another big choke point again when you have more SuperDocks
In
there?
the Alameda corridor, you mean?
Yeah, right at the beginning of the corridor, because you're going to have one SuperDock here, another one here,
There's going to
another
be a
one
Well, that's
there.
the
Alameda corridor built in underground 20-foot.
Our estimates for that SuperDock right now are somewhere in the vicinity of 20 million TEU per year. Now, keep in mind that the most that the ports of LA and Long Beach have ever done collectively is 17.5 million in 2008. That was their best shot. So what I'm saying is that if you have to continually grow again, the land is there. It does. There's no EIR to start and open up another container terminal. The land is there, and that's the key here. But if it doesn't grow, if we're wrong about 40 years from now, then other industries will be there. And guess what? Longshoremen are going to be there to handle those industries, whether it be shipbuilding, whether it be another cruise line. The problem is we kind of like heroin addicts when it comes to containers, because it's the only thing we know. And we want to build more because we get more money out of it, so we make more pollution, we make more docks, we make more terminals. We learn that it's the cheap, fast way to do it. And now there's this opportunity to modernize. 50 years of doing something technically in any other business is insanity. It is. I have to be the little boy saying the emperor has no clothes in this business. He doesn't. But it's controlled by certain people in certain businesses, and that control has to, and the change has to come from higher than the ports. It has to come from higher than labor. It has to come higher than a railroad. It has to come from political will. The political will has to drive the project and say, this thing's going to create 1 million jobs over 8 years. We don't care. If it's green, do the EIR. And if the EIR proves 50% of what I'm telling you, it's still going to be the best EIR in history.
But then you'd still have to expand these, the width or the capacity of these corridors then.
The beauty is that new technology, once we get a run on technology and we learn how to do this, there's going to be some really smart guy who's going to look at that thing and say, I know a way to do it 10 times faster. And believe it or not, he's out there. He's 2 years old right now.
Let me also interject that, especially with the fully separated right-of-way that we envision it being underground, you can run these 7,500 foot unit trains that close to subway-type headways, one right after the other.
And they're drones, so there's no people.
Yeah,
on them.
they're robot trains, you know, so it's there's no danger. You can build a simpler structure because you don't have to have the same ventilation and all that. Once they get to the big out in the Inland Empire, they're broken out and put onto regular trains in Kabul. But you could run them, you know, 4 minutes apart.
But you'd still need more tracks than just that one I saw.
Well, I mean, that's just a...
No, that's yeah, one could be the Inland Empire, one could be the City of Industry, one could be in Commerce or downtown. So they end up just surfacing in the cities, but they never come into contact with human beings.
Hi, so in any system, my name is Jason here.
Jason.
In any system where you analyze performance and try to optimize, you move bottlenecks around. There's always a bottleneck. So if we remove the big bottleneck at the port, where's the next bottleneck? Is it in Chicago? They have to unload so many trains coming in. Where's the next bottleneck?
What happens is, you're right, absolutely, there is the next bottleneck. And what happens is, what you see here is you see a conventional generation of train and a new generation of train. What's going to happen is somebody at the BNSF is going to say, hey, why don't we build one of these receiving docks in Dallas? Why don't we build one of these receiving docks in Memphis? And then that unit train doesn't stop. That unit train becomes the new unit train. And like DNA, it goes in, unloads, gets loaded, goes back. What happens? Increase the average per mile per hour performance of the industry. And by increasing the per mile average mile per hour is what the railroads are all about. The longest trains at the fastest turn times. That's their performance model. Same with the ships. Bigger ships, full.
You don't see any performance or bottlenecks on the long haul trains. It's always just at the end point.
It's always at the end point. Absolutely. The last mile, the urban mile, is by far and away. The closer you get to the water, the more congested the operation becomes.
Or to the destination. But you know, if you go out in Arizona, sit by the tracks, you'll see like UPS trains going by one signal block apart, one after the other. They've got that down.
That's not where the show. Yeah, we've got a great infrastructure.
Trains could just be hooked up to diesel locomotives once they run out of the electrification zone and be pulled by conventional means across the country and then get back into an electrified right-of-way once they approach the destination to preserve life in the cities.
Yeah. So you might see a transition of the rail car type. That's what's going to happen. The stacks they have right now are 3- and 5-car well. They're built by different manufacturers, and there's no rhyme or reason to their distance. But this drone train has the distance relative to the superstructure in that it has a utility. It has a purpose for being there. So once it goes in, you can grab them all at once and load them all back. And that's going to be the height of efficiency. I don't know if you can get any more efficient than that.
Joel Kovarugas next.
Hi, I just got a question about bottlenecks. We're talking about basically creating from what is currently 2 separate ports, the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles, basically creating one big port that uses the same container system that also feeds into the Inland Empire and beyond.
That's correct.
Right now, if the Port of Long Beach decided to increase its fees, then the Port of Los Angeles might keep theirs the same, and more traffic would go through them. There's something of competition between the two.
Correct.
Right now, it looks. I mean, from this plan, it sounds like what we're doing is consolidating all this, putting it into a private company's hands.
Well, not necessarily a private company. I'll tell you what, the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach might want to be the concessionaires on this project as well.
Or a joint venture.
Joint venture,
or a
yes.
joint venture, sure.
There's already private companies involved in
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm getting to my question. Basically, I'm seeing a disappearance of competition. That's the first thing. Second thing is by putting this on a smaller footprint, it seems like we're putting our freight traffic at much greater risk from a security standpoint.
I'm glad you asked that question. I'm very glad. The most important thing is security. Right now in this business, the ports will claim that approximately 10% of the freight is being X-ray checked, not censored, but X-ray. But you're talking about security, right?
Yes.
Okay. Right now, approximately 10% is X-ray checked. That is not true. It's much less than 10%. Much less. Because I've seen them do it. They use these machines to drive. They have a crew that goes to each terminal. They pull out 50 containers and they run them. I don't know what the reason is for those 50 or 60 containers to be pulled, but they're pulled and they're checked. This system has so many entry points that you can actually put X-rays within the mouth of the superstructure itself, so you get 100% reads before they even enter land. In other words, when they get to the pier, they are screened. Screen going in and screen going out. The problem is you have Homeland Security operating at 12 different terminals with 12 different crews using only $3 million X-ray trucks going from terminal to terminal to terminal. It is insanely inefficient.
I'm not even just talking about I'm not even just talking about the containers themselves. I'm talking about the infrastructure itself. I mean, you're talking about a SuperDock here. That if somebody was to come and do something, I don't want to say stuff.
Sure. No, I understand.
And they cause an explosion and basically wipe out all product coming into the United States.
And what you say for the Panama Canal? Once you blow up the Panama Canal and you blow up a lock, the Panama Canal is done.
Yeah,
but it's the same thing. It's
so
a
we
choke
have
point
that.
from east to
We
west.
have it
Actually, there's
the
a big difference.
we also have it on the tunnels.
Right.
The tunnels are inaccessible because they don't need human access. The trains are drones. The other factor is that you saw the size of the SuperDock. how big a bomb are you going to bring? You're going to need a nuke to take that out. You blow up one end of it, 85% of it still operates.
Did you say the tunnels don't need human access?
No, the tunnels will only need human maintenance. Right, right. But it's not the same as human egress for thousands of people.
Right now, you give me 4 satchels of C4, I can blow up all the rail lines here in one day. You know, because the Alameda corridor, and I know where they are. Okay, everybody knows where they are. Now, here's the other thing though. In World War II, we repeatedly bombed German rail yards. Over and over and over again. They would run damage assessment flights over there, photographing vast rail yard hit with a flight of, what, about 40 B-17s, each dropping a stick of 2,500-pound bombs. 3 days later, those rail yards were repaired. Rail technology is extremely easy and extremely fast.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, back then it didn't cost $10 billion to make a rail project. Now it does.
That's correct.
But I mean, you're talking about the surface accessible. When you got the tunnels, that is extremely easy to secure, as opposed to a surface.
But it's more expensive.
It's more, well, certainly. But you're doing it for other reasons. You're doing it for environmental and community reasons as well, and development reasons. So, but once you have it, you know, instead of having 40 miles of track to protect, you've just got the access points where the maintenance crews go in.
Okay. We can talk about that later. We can follow this conversation.
Sure.
Sir?
My question is, right now, Port of Long Beach and Port of Los Angeles, they compete each other for
That's
business. Would it be more effective to sell your concept and the solution to one unified port authority, which would be a combination of Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long
Good,
Beach?
sir. You see where we're going here. The Port of LA and Long Beach has 2 CEOs. They have 2 commissions. They have 500 staff all on each side doing the same thing. There are 12 terminals that do the same thing. 2 city councils. That's correct. What we're talking about doing is we're getting the Alameda corridor, which is a joint power authority, and we are bridging that last mile to the water's edge. Why not just become the Alameda corridor? Or why not buy the Alameda corridor? Because they're not making enough money to do it. So the consortium's plan is to purchase the Alameda corridor. People think I'm crazy, that I would want to buy the Alameda corridor? Call me crazy. But I would want to buy that asset.
It's all one big public water.
Sorry, go ahead.
One, this facility,
Yes,
is
sir.
it equipped to handle different lengths of containers? Because you have 40, you have 45, you have 48, 53, in some cases 58, and then you have reefer units.
That's correct, sir.
And it's equipped to handle it. The second one is, has competition been considered, such as Rupert, where you just put the freight on the train and goes to Chicago, Memphis, and New Orleans?
That's exactly what we're worried about. That's exactly what we're worried
Canadian
about.
National's doing it.
That's right. And what we want to do is we want to do it in an automated fashion where the day and a half that Prince Rupert has on us, because of where they're at, in terms of how fast they go. Now our advantage of the Panama Canal is that they're a day behind us. It takes 2 days for them to come back and to go and come back in terms of travel time alone to get to Panama than it does for us. But Rupert has an advantage that they're closer to Asia. It's just the way the oceans work in distance. But in our case, by building this 100-acre platform, less than a 2% footprint than what the system has now, and moving that. And by the way, your question about container size, the system is built in modules. In other words, the module will have a 45-foot, 40, 20, 20, 20, 40, 45, 40, and then the module will repeat itself and repeat itself and repeat itself. So if you have a smaller terminal like Houston and you only need a 2,500 foot pier, as long as you got more water and you want to make it a bigger terminal, you simply add more modules. You construct more modules to the system. So as it goes to 5 million or 10 million TEU, you add modules to the dock. And those docks will repeat, 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 repeat in the same 20, 40, 53, 20, 20 configuration, whatever we figure out when we do it. It'll become what's called universal. It's a universal port. And that universal port means that it works the same way here as it does in Houston, as it does in New York, New Jersey, or anywhere. That's the beauty of the system, is the technology can be shared by everybody, and the railroads will be the beneficiary. They'll also be Norfolk Southern. They'll also be all of the other East Coast terminals, railroads, who look at what's happening with the Union Pacific and the BN and say, we want that technology. It's a standardized format.
But I think we need to explain the sorting within the SuperDock.
Well, you know, if you want to get much into the operations of the system, it is very simple. I mean, the containers move inside, and there's a lot of machinery already in existence that moves up this way and moves that way. This system basically goes this way and goes that way, and it allows you to get a container anywhere on the terminal you want to. And it's rolled by overhead cranes or a platform that runs this way. Very, very simple configuration. But what I'm saying is that it's repeated over and over and over again. So what you're talking about is building cubes of a pier that get bigger as long as your container growth continues to expand. But you're not going to use land anymore. Roger?
Okay. I'm sorry. I passed over about 100 times. But look. How far up how many presentations have you did to present this to like the board of supervisors, the people of Long Beach? You know, do you
I've made a lot.
Present, you know, with scoping.
Almost all of our presentations have gone to people who are in the NRDC. We're going on our 4th presentation to the Sierra Club. It's going to be our 4th. We just did 3. We did yours, we did Long Beach, we did our 4th presentation to the Sierra Club. What we're saying is that this project is an environmental system, and we want the Sierra Club to say, spend $20 billion in growth, not $2 billion, $1 billion for the Port of LA and $1 billion for the Port of Long Beach. Spend 20 times that, as long as it's green. As long as it's really green, not this pig lipstick on a pig green that you're trying to sell us right now. Make it truly green. Electrify everything.
How close are you to funding this project?
Right now, the majority, where we're at right now is we formed LLCs, two LLCs, and basically spent the majority of the money protecting patent rights, to be honest with you. That's where we had to be first. Basically, you have to protect your invention, and that's what this is. This is an invention. It's proprietary. It's something that when you think about it and you're the inventor, the first thing you want to do, or the first thing everybody tells you to do, is to protect yourself. So we spent most of the time doing that, but now we have a value, we have a product. And so the next step is to get investors, but I think if you were an investor and you happen to be an undercover multi-millionaire right now sitting right there, you might say, this is not only a project I want to invest in because I'm going to make money, but it's a good project. It's doing the right thing. It seems to be transparent. It doesn't seem to be hiding anything, that it's going to kill labor or kill trucking or kill business. It's going to, what we're doing is we're pruning a tree. We're pruning a very, very messy bush. And when you prune it, it's going to grow back beautifully. And that's our strategy.
Sir, on electrification.
Now, you need to speak up as people can.
Electrification. I'll respond. What is the attitudes of the railroads towards the Alameda Corridor or Alameda Corridor East, and what is about the BNSF?
That's a good question. He's asking about with electrification, how are the railroads going to approach this? I want to say I gave up on the railroads a long time ago. You have to create your own right of way. And that's why we went to the utility companies. Because all of that land underneath those towers, you can't build anything there except nurseries. And what we'd like to do is put a pipeline, buy all the nurseries, and when we have to fix everything, we'll put all of the trees that we bought and all the bushes, and we'll put them out there, and then we'll move the owners somewhere else. And that's the idea. We want to beautify what we dig. But all we're going to do is we're going to dig a trench. We're not going to get a German 50-foot monster earth-eating tunnel boring machine. It's going to be very much the same as a water project. What does a water project do? You dig a ditch, you put an 18-foot pipe in it, you cover the ditch, you put rail on it, and you're good to go with some escape routes for your maintenance guys. But it's not going to need the ventilation or the escape routes that you would need if you had people in it, which makes the cost of the project significantly less expensive.
David, I wanted to mention on a better news up front, we just won a project from Port of Long Beach, what they call it shore-to-ship power retrofit of their berths.
Cold ironing.
Cold ironing.
Yes, sir.
And I was thinking, can you use that same AQMD?
Yes, we want to. And after the meeting, we can talk.
Criteria requirement to drive your project?
Yes,
because
sir.
it's good to maintain that air quality emission.
Absolutely, and anybody who knows anything about what he's talking about programs with the AQMD. Keep in mind, the Metro Widening Project going on right now, the EIR, requires a zero emissions guideway in their study. This project is it. The Army Corps of Engineers said, tell Metro to pay us to do it, and we'll do the whole project from start to finish. And again, we want the EIR. I'm the only guy who's crazy enough who wants an EIR. But I want an EIR because I know how it's going to turn out. I know the impact I'm going to have on the existing polluting technology.
If you do that, are the railroad corridors going to be created the same way?
I'm sorry?
The railroad corridors are judged that way. Is it going to require them to electrify? And is there objection that they don't want to electrify or they don't want to pay to electrify?
That's a good question. What it is that the railroads don't want to... Okay, he's asking about electrification with the railroads. And number two, is this right-of-way going to be a separate right-of-way? The answer is yes. It will be its own right-of-way. But the reality is that the railroads are going to recognize the evaluation of the performance of electrification, and when they see that, they're going to say, wait a minute, we have real data on units moved over a year of performance. It's less expensive. We will recapture our savings against diesel fuel by X amount over 5 or 6 years. Once they realize that that is a real number and not some imaginary thing some snake oil salesman is trying to give them, and they see it in the real world, they will electrify the Alameda corridor. I promise you they will.
Right now, there's a very small choke point. There's one rail leading from Terminal Island to the main road in Wilmington, Long Beach.
Right.
And how is that going to be improved upon? Is it get the tunnel under it, add new...
Are you talking about the facilities they want to build now?
No, I'm talking about either when you want to build or whoever wants to build new facilities.
Right.
How is that going to be dealt with? In fact, that's a very narrow choke.
It is a narrow choke point, but the reality is that the problem isn't the corridor itself. The problem is the converging of rail ties that congregate at the point. The SuperDock will not have that problem. The SuperDock is throwing full 10,000 foot, 7,500 foot trains through the corridor like a piston.
So there'll be other bridges across it.
They'll probably widen the. They're already doing it anyway. I think to 6 lanes. Yeah, and they're already going to expand that anyway. But that helps us. It allows us to. And keep in mind, one of the things somebody was talking about a service failure. Keep in mind, we're not ripping out all the other rail lines. If tomorrow you had to put conventional trains back, if the SuperDock were somehow impaired, you've got $50 billion worth of infrastructure already there. So you could send the trains, you could bring the trucks back. There's a big trucking community here. It's less than 10% containerized trucking than all of the other industrial trucking that goes along here in Southern California. You will get your fleet of trucks, and they'll be getting paid a lot of money in the interim if that system were to go down. But what I'm saying is almost overnight, you could go back to conventional operations with the land you have existing.
Oh, thank you so much.
You got your backup.
You have backup. It's already there. You don't want to tear down the old bridge. Sir?
Oh, a couple questions. Are you anticipating building this railroad switching yard next to the port in order to handle the trains that are coming directly out of the SuperDock?
Or you mean it goes straight to the corridor?
Yeah, there won't be a switching yard needed because what happens is that the beauty of the system is that right now at the Port of LA and Long Beach, if I'm sending a container from Shanghai to Dallas, I can go to 10 different terminals to get that Dallas can onto a dock. The problem is that because they're miles apart from each other, they don't have enough container volume for Dallas to build a full unit train. So what do? They truck it. They truck all the Dallas trains through the 710 freeway to Commerce. In this case, the SuperDock, because it's all in one place, all rail-designated ships would go to the pier. Keep in mind, you're still going to leave about 5 or 6 of the biggest terminals open. And what those terminals are going to do is they're going to do all the truck drayage that we don't service throughout the rest of the region. That's still many, many millions of truck trips. Keep in mind, we're not taking it all. But the reality is the full unit train is built at the dock, so there's no reason to switch. That full unit train is 7,500 to 10,000 feet long to that city. It's built there.
My question though really is, how are you going to handle all the full unit trains that you're going to need to go to these different cities? You can't have one train that goes up to Colton or the Alba corridor or something like that. You really need to be able to load each individual train that's going direct to its destination.
That's correct.
And how are you going to do that without a switching grid?
Because all of the containers are inside 5,000 cell guides. There's 5,000 storage cells inside the SuperDock. And 5,000 storage cells, and you're talking about 7,500 foot pier. And if you move it, if you actually shift it diagonally, you can make it a 10,000 foot pier.
The question really is, the question really is, how many trains are you going to have at the SuperDock at any one time?
Remember, the train in the SuperDock, as opposed to the conventional train that's also serviced at the SuperDock, can be turned around in half an hour. It comes in, it shuttles out. Another one's coming in. You've got your headways. You have your headways between shuttle trains timed to the turnaround time that develops in the dock.
So where are these trains going to switch then?
Now, so you
They don't switch.
They don't switch. They're already full. They're all full unit trains.
You have the sorting done in the SuperDock. The Dallas train gets loaded, out it goes. In comes the
But at some
Chicago
point you're
train.
single threading these things into the SuperDock.
That's correct.
Well, within the
So
dock, you've got.
where is a single thread become multiple threads and a multiple threads become a single thread? And somewhere.
Because, you know what, stick around for the animation and you'll get it. Because what's happening is that you're seeing thousands of containers going this way and going this way on the dock. And they're being built already in a staging area within the superstructure so that when the train pulls up, they just feed the train. They unload it, they eat it, and then they unload it. But it's in a very highly automated environment. Once the containers are in the superstructure, they're identified on what ship they're going to go to or what train conversely they're going to go to.
And how long do you envision having on-site storage?
I'm sorry?
Do you envision having any on-site storage?
Absolutely. There is on-site storage, but the beauty of the system is by having the drone train system, we're moving out a lot of the containers that would fill up the terminal very, very quickly. So those containers that are out in a facility in the Inland Empire, if we don't need the empties, we leave them in the Inland Empire. If we don't need those imports for a couple of days because the ship's not coming, we won't put them on the drone train yet. It gives us a lot more flexibility of exactly what you're talking about. The operational aspect of getting choke points because of too many containers being in one place. That's the problem we have today conventionally with the ports.
The turnaround time for one ship, let's say, that's another question.
That's the other big issue, yes sir.
Yeah, so what about that time?
The reason that it'd take a long time for me to explain the operational reasons for why it takes 3 days to have a ship.
I can understand.
No. It's not that it would just take me to go through exactly what the operational, where it goes here and there. But the reality is that because people are not underneath the system and that new pieces of equipment, whether it's going on what they call a bomb cart, which is basically a chassis for the yard, it's basically a big tray that you slam a container on, but it only goes in the yard, it doesn't go off. But then there's the chassis. And then the chassis, the crane operator has to put it squarely on the locks of the container. And what it does is it kills the time. But in this case, it's going from ship to platform, ship to platform, ship to platform. So the crane is loosened from having to land. What's going to happen is your crane operator is going to land on the can, but he's going to hit a button, and automatically, robotically, it's going to jump on the platform, and then it'll give it back to the operator to go back and land on the can again. And that's why it's going to be almost like a semi-automatic weapon compared to what the cranes are that do now. Because it's always going back to the platform. It's not going onto a truck.